Hello, and welcome back to Big Discussions. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar. I am the owner of this channel and the creator of the Big Words blog site. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And if you have some time, please go over to the Big Words blog site and take a look around and see what's there. There's a lot of information over there now. Today is March 11th, 2019. And as you can see, I am back in DC. I was at a writer's retreat slash advance over the weekend. I kind of summarized that in the last video, but I'm back now. I was going to open this video up with some jokes about going to the dentist. I went to the dentist today to have a cleaning, and I was telling my brother that it's a lot less fun as an adult than it is for a child, than it is when you go as a child, in terms of, that someone's using sharp tools and digging around in your mouth and whatnot. But I'm not gonna belabor that because I have a lot to say in this particular vlogcast, and this is an important vlogcast, and this might be maybe the most important one that I've done thus far. So I'm going to jump in by talking about my blog. If you visit my blog, you'll see that I have a couple of content areas that are my main content areas: education, STEM, and money slash financial literacy. As a part of education, if you go on numerous blog posts, you'll see that one of the categories is career discussions. So sometimes I write about and I talk about career considerations, things to think about when going into different careers and different professions. And so in this particular vlogcast, we're gonna kind of marry the two. We're gonna have a career discussion and a financial literacy slash money discussion. I have some points on my computer monitor over here, so you may see me look away a couple times throughout this, but I'm going to try to move through as efficiently and as swiftly as possible. So let's jump in and have some fun. Let's see. So this particular topic has been rolling around in my mind for a while, and it's something that I think about often. And I may make some enemies with this video, actually. Some of my, particularly some of my peers who have Ph.D.s and who are well credentialed and well accomplished. But I think this is something that needs to be discussed, and it's a discussion that's worth having. The impetus for making this video, I think it came late last week when I was on social media. I won't say which social media it was, but two doctoral candidates were tweeting about being in graduate school, and I know that at least one of them was in awe of the fact that he was going to be a doctor one day. I don't know what his major was or what his thesis was going to be in, but he was very enamored and excited that he was going to be a doctor, and that's cool. But there are some things that you need to keep in mind on the way to becoming a doctor if you're in graduate school, and there are things that you need to keep in mind if you know someone in your family, for example, who's going ahead and becoming a doctor. As you know, I have a PhD in pharmacology, myself. It wasn't something that was planned. And if you go to my 2018 Father's Day blog post, you'll see that my father actually had plans for what he wanted me and my brother to be. And I think both of us went in different directions from what he wanted us to be. But what's interesting, and I'll throw my father in there with this, is that in our society in the United States, and I don't know if it's like this in Europe or in Asia or in Africa or in other parts of the world, but there is a fascination with titles. So in this particular instance, there's a fascination with the title of doctor. That title holds a lot of weight, and it garners a lot of respect, and it gives some people who hold the title a bit of a god complex sometimes. And I talked about this a little bit about this in my vlogcast about knowing when to leave your job and leaving your job on your own terms. But it's not just doctors, it's celebrities, it's people we see on the news. It's so our job statuses and our job titles can often give us a godlike complex, and cause a lot of reverence for people in the government. If you're a division director, or if you're SES, the government has something called SES, which is the Senior Executive Service. All these titles bring with them a certain amount of prestige and awe from other people. And with those titles, and again, this is for the people who hold these titles, and it's for people around them. With those titles come assumptions about how the person is doing financially. It brings assumptions about their wealth. It brings assumptions about their lifestyle, and it brings assumptions about how they're living. And this is very, very, in my opinion, it's very, very dangerous. And it's something that everybody needs to be careful about. A couple years ago, I was hanging out with an acquaintance. My dad says that a lot, acquaintance. I was hanging out with an acquaintance out in Maryland, and this person was a professor at one of the ACC schools. And when we were sitting and talking, she kept saying, "I don't make a lot of money. I don't make a lot of money. I don't make a lot of money." This is a Ph.D. She's written books. I believe she was a tenured professor in the humanities, and she kept saying, "I don't make a lot of money." I didn't ask her about it, but that stood in my mind that you would assume that a Ph.D. and a professor at an ACC university would be pretty well off, but according to her, she didn't make a lot of money. Now, DC is an expensive market, so it's different to live here than it is back in my hometown of Buffalo or out in Albany, the Albany area, where my father lives. But I just remember her saying that. So you can be a PhD and not make a lot of money depending upon what your PhD is in and the cost of living in your particular locale. And so again, everybody has to be careful of making those assumptions, family members, friends, peers, etc. So where does money, financial literacy, and wealth factor into career? The truth is, no matter which career you choose, you have to know something about money. You have to know something about financial literacy, and you have to have a plan. To my parents' credit, uh, they were both savers. They were both frugal people, and they both, I think, passed on a work ethic and the importance of saving and the importance of holding down a job. They both passed that on. But beyond that, there wasn't much more. I'll just say that, and that's not knocking them. That's just saying that that's probably what they knew, and so everything else that I needed to know, and everything else that I've learned since then, I kind of had to go out and learn on my own. And it's not like that in every family. There are some families where the parents know a lot about investing and wealth building, and the kids kind of just hit the ground running. So, the assumption was, for me, and probably for my father, was that once I finished my Ph.D., and I have a Ph.D. in a STEM, I think that the assumption was once I graduated, I would hit the ground running. Well, it took another 2 years for me to get some more experience to actually get my federal job. But even once I got my federal job, there were some mistakes made, and there were some things to learn before I could actually start thinking about, building wealth. And one lesson you learn is that you don't talk about what you have. So I don't want to talk about what I have or what I've accumulated, if anything. But I'm just going to say that there were lessons that I had to learn once I started working that would have been very valuable to know before I started working. When I was in graduate school, I remember there was a black couple who had gotten their PhDs in one of the biomedical sciences. And I remember they came back and they spoke to our Association of Minority Scientists. They told us, when you guys are in here getting your graduate degrees, you really got to pay attention to your credit, and you really have to pay attention to your credit score and how you maintain your finances, because at some point you're going to want to go out and buy a home. And so when you go out and buy a home, your credit becomes very important, as many of you know. And if you don't know, you're going to find out eventually. So life goes in stages, At some point it's about getting your degree. At some point it's about getting a car. And then once you finish your schooling, you want to buy a house. If you have a family, you want to get a house in a good school district. And then if you're thinking about it, you want to retire one day. We're going to come back to that. So there are things that you need to know beyond just your profession in terms of money. You need to have a financial plan. You need to know how money works to actually build wealth, whether you're a bus driver, a plumber, a school teacher, a regulatory scientist, an airline pilot, or whatever. You need to know about money. Everybody needs to know about money in order to build wealth. When I was in graduate school, I picked up a copy of Rich Dad Poor Dad. I was at Barnes & Noble one day in Ann Arbor, and I just strolled in on a Sunday afternoon, and Rich Dad Poor Dad was sitting there at the front of the store. This is not Rich Dad Poor Dad, but it's one of the books by, but this is Robert Kiyosaki. Robert Kiyosaki wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad. He's a bit of a, there's some controversy that surrounds Robert, and I'm not going to get into that. There are a lot of people who wonder whether or not his rich dad is real. Some people say that, he's all talk. But I think that he has done a lot in terms of financial literacy, in teaching people about money. When I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, there were a lot of powerful things in there in terms of thinking about whether or not your house is an asset. thinking about and knowing about what an income statement and a balance sheet is, understanding cash flow, understanding that most of us were trained to be employees and to work for someone else, understanding that there are tax laws for different individuals in our society, knowing what passive income is. Thought that was all valuable stuff that I didn't know about, and stuff that I wish that I learned about much earlier. After I read the book, I went to a buddy in my department, and I won't mention his name, but maybe months or so ago, he got this game here, which is Cash Flow 101. So Robert created a board game called Cash Flow 101 and an e-game as well, which you can play on your computer. And I played the e-game for the most part during my postdoc, but he created Cash Flow 101 to go along with his books to teach the players about money, and you do learn a lot by playing the game. But after I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, I told my buddy, I said, "Hey, I read this cool book called Rich Dad Poor Dad," and he said, "Yeah, I told you about that when I invited you over to play the game." So that was kind of funny. But I learned a lot from that book, and that's a book. If you're not well read up on these subjects, that's a first book that I would recommend, even if you don't have any intentions on getting out of the rat race and onto the fast track and becoming wealthy. It's an eye opener, in my opinion. So again, you have to have a plan, whether or not you're a medical doctor or a lawyer or a school principal. You have to have a plan to maximize earnings, and then you have to have a plan to know what to do with those earnings. Wealth building is much more than your degree. It's much more than your Ph.D. or M.D. or your law degree. And it's actually independent of career. One of the things this game does is that it allows you to pick a profession. You could be a web designer or a janitor or an airline pilot or a medical doctor or a lawyer. And one of the things that you learn is that there are different costs associated with each profession. And so it's actually easier to get out of the rat race and onto the fast track when you're the janitor or the web designer. And the reason being is that these people have less debt to pay for and to account for. So versus the lawyer or the doctor who has lots of debt. And I talk about this in my 2018 Father's Day post. But that's one of the things that this game teaches you. And the reality is you don't have to become a doctor or a lawyer to become wealthy. You could become wealthy being a garbage man or a taxi cab driver or a plumber or a carpenter. And that's something that I'm happy that I got a Ph.D. in pharmacology, but this information would have been very valuable much earlier in life. So it requires some learning beyond your PhD or whatever, whichever degree you've gone and gotten. You have to learn about things like what emergency funds are, what the different asset classes are, what debt is. You have to learn about compound interest, what matching contributions are. That's something I didn't take advantage of my first couple of years as a federal employee. At some point maybe you want to think about setting up multiple streams of income as opposed to just having the one income from your job. These are all things that you start to learn about when you become financially literate, and these are all things that I would encourage learning beyond your degree. Let's see. Many high-income professionals, and this is talked about in the Millionaire Next Door series. Dr. Thomas Stanley talks about the difference between wealthy people and high-income professionals. Many high-income professionals are actually struggling. So many lawyers and doctors and these kinds of people, they're actually struggling because many of them finish school with lots of debt. And many of them are under pressure to maintain the image and to look the part of who they are, and to live in and to move into very affluent neighborhoods. All these things come with a price, and if you don't know how to manage those, you can keep yourself in financial shackles for most of your working life. So, knowing about these things can help you manage and build wealth and become financially peaceful. So in summary, does your degree equal wealth and a good life? No, not necessarily. And this is important because there are people out there who feel like, okay, once I have my degree, once I have my Ph.D. or my M.D. or whatever, I'll be set. That's not necessarily the case. And you have people bragging about, in some instances, being degreed. And that's just a piece that may lead you to a good life, but it's not necessarily a guarantee. So there's a whole lot of studying that you need to do besides your professional training. But the information is out there. A lot of it's in books. And one just has to be curious enough to go get it and to go find it and then to study it and to start incorporating it. And what you'll find is that once you start studying this stuff, it has, I'm going to make some enemies here, and that's okay. It has very little to do with race. I'm going to say that again. Once you start reading books like The Millionaire Next Door, or Stop Acting Rich and Start Thinking Like a Real Millionaire, and you start living by some of those principles, you're going to start to see that, again, it has very little to do with race. Let's see, why is that important? It's important because it contradicts a lot of the messages we're taught in society, and a lot of the messages we're exposed to in the media, and in particular around election time. Oftentimes the political parties, at least one of them, plays class warfare where they attempt to pit wealthy people against the lower classes or the less affluent people. They pit these groups against each other, oftentimes using race and those types of things. But again, once you start studying this stuff, is that it has very little to do with your ethnicity or your color. And it makes you think. When you meet someone wealthy or see someone wealthy, were they born into that, or was it something that they built on their own volition and their own drive and their own curiosity, and that changes your outlook on things to a degree. And so with that, this one's gone pretty long, so I'm going to conclude there. I'm going to leave my net worth piece, which I think is the first financial piece I wrote up on my blog. I'm going to leave that in the description box below. That one did pretty well without me having to really boost it. There are a lot of people who don't understand what a net worth is, and why it's important. And I think that that is a very important term to know. And if more people understood that, it would change their financial lives and their spending habits and those kinds of things. I'm also going to leave my compounding interest piece in the description box below. That's another piece that I didn't understand until after I started working, and that stopped me from. Well, that was one of the things that stopped me from contributing to my retirement throughout my tenure as a federal employee, and I'm starting to catch up. But that's a hindrance if you don't know and understand that law. So with that, I'm going to conclude. If you've hung on for this entire 26 minutes, thank you for watching. And I would encourage you to, if you haven't started yet, pick up a financial book and start studying and start asking questions. Rich Dad Poor Dad is a good book to start with. Any Dave Ramsey book is a good book to start with. Any Dr. Thomas Stanley book is a good book to start with. And with that, I will conclude, and I will see you the next time. So, in summary, does your Ph.D. In closing, does your Ph.D. or your whichever degree that you have, does that guarantee that you'll be wealthy? The answer is no. There are other things you have to do, and there's other studying you have to do to make that happen for yourself. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they are not being truthful with you. So with that, I will conclude, and I will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.